This is a Wicked Cool Kids production.
Hello and welcome to another episode of the Wicked Cool Kids podcast. As an offshoot of our normal podcast, we have a special series where we interview our community's game masters. If this is your first time joining us, welcome. There are many other episodes you can listen to and find wonderful nuggets of information from our guests, and maybe you'll enjoy our main podcast as well. Today, I'm bringing back someone with whom I've sat down with previously, but today he is going to answer for his crimes against humanity. Well, maybe it's not quite that serious, but this game master is probably the one with the highest player death count on his hands that I can think of. Without further ado, welcome back, Tom, also known as TheTallTom. How are you doing today?
I'm increasingly feeling like I should have bought a defense attorney. Is that I wasn't told this was going to be a disciplinary. I feel like I need a member of the union at the very least.
I gave you very bare minimum. I sold it to you as we were talking about nitty gritty rules, but also
I reread Dungeon Master Guide optional rules and did homework and everything, and now I'm on trial. Yeah, no, I'm ready for this. Bring it.
Okay, great. How'd you sleep last night, knowing that you've killed several of my favorite people?
Yeah, log-like.
I thought so. All right, so let's start. Many of us bright-eyed, bushy-tailed fresh players are completely unaware that there are other rules, in quotation marks, that your game master can choose to employ if they so opt to. These rules bring some harsh reality to this beloved fantasy game. For instance, most times you get into an epic battle. Your companions fall on the battlefield. Thank goodness someone you know brought a cleric along who heals them up so they can continue to fight, and lo and behold, they emerge victorious. The weary group then heads back to the tavern, has an ale and a hearty stew, gets 8 hours of sleep, and voila! Upon waking the next day, they're fully recovered. Miracles happen in D&D, folks. But in real life, that's not how that works. So, Tom, let's talk about what draws you into implementing these nitty-gritty rules into your games. Is it for the realism aspect, or did your love of other TTRPGs and their systems influence your cruelty? Decision-making. There.
I feel at some point we're going to have to go through two deaths over 80 sessions, and we're going to unpick exactly who was responsible for them. But in answer to your question, I think this you've identified two of the three factors. I think also you never forget your first time, and I came in with basic D&D and advanced D&D, and it was you hit 0 hit points, you're dead. No revivify, no death saves. And that kind of sucked, but it does kind of prime you with a certain expectation of how risky combat should be. So that's the first thing. When I came to 5th edition, I went, everything is gorgeous, everything is tidied up, everything makes sense. Oh, it's impossible to die. Was my series of discoveries. And then I
wanted to bring your trauma to your players.
Yeah. That was,
Fair enough. Shared trauma makes for strong bonds.
Lots of people say their favorite thing about D&D is making characters, and if you don't give them an opportunity to make 3 or 4 in a campaign, what a disservice you are doing to your players.
I feel like I need to let you personally know that is not my favorite part of D&D. It's a very painstaking process for me. So if we could just
I might have picked up on that.
Yeah. Okay. All right. Continue. So you hate us and you like killing us, and it's because you personally had some hardship when you first started playing D&D back in.
I started out as a DM, so it's you
started out hurting people.
Yeah, and to be honest, there were a lot of TPKs. I think. Like reading accounts of Gary Gygax, the co-creator of D&D's original games, and this phrase, the meat grinder, There was this kind of idea back in the 70s and early 80s that part of the game was skillful playing. Like a lot of people had come from a wargaming background. And so the idea was like you had to earn your levels by not dying. And you would end up with like convention games where you could bring characters, but only characters that had legitimately been played up to a certain level. And the DM would take sheets of dead characters and rip them up in front of people. And I don't want, no. And actually, like the original, we're playing Tomb of Annihilation, which is an homage to Tomb of Horrors, one of Gary Gygax's. But that idea of a meat grinder, where if you open the wrong door and make a death save, or you're immediately disintegrated, and it was, if you got through it, that was a major achievement. And people, it was designed to be replayed again and again and again, and eventually people would meet up and go, have you actually completed Tomb of Horrors? I don't want to go back to that. That seems like having to roll up a new character every half hour, especially in a game like D&D where rolling up a character takes a good half an hour. Not fun. Flip side, like given that the smallest combat can take about 45 minutes to an hour anyway, you do want them to feel that there's some potential consequence on the table. And when I opened up 5th edition Dungeon Master's Guide and went, oh, there's things here we can add in that are official and approved and not my weird ass homebrew. It's an exciting moment.
It does. It brings a real sense of gravity to the game, right? And we will talk about it later, but the consequences and the stakes are so much higher when you play like this, right? It's not, oh, hey, I mean, you came into this situation and you see that there are bad guys, and these bad guys, you probably want to do away with them, but you're not strong enough. Well, I mean, we'll do it anyway because it's 5e, and all I need is to go hide behind a tree for a quick second and put my hands on my knees, take a deep breath, and I'm good to go again, right? You have to know when to run away or hide or retreat tactically, right? To be able to survive, to do the thing. And you have to make sure you've crossed all the T's and dotted all the I's before you put that last puzzle cube in, to make sure that, you're not going to trigger a trap and kill everybody when you've spent 80 sessions up until this point trying to get here and then blow it all because you didn't think it through. So let's talk about healing for a second, because I just talk about, putting my hands on my knees, take a good deep breath. In your games, you make your players dependent upon healers kits. This means you cannot roll for hit dice during a short rest unless someone uses a healer's kit to bandage and fix you up. What happens if, for instance, let's say, I'll just pull an example out of the thin air, in an unforgiving jungle like Schultz, when your players run out of healer's kit uses? What happens then? Just for science.
Fun times. Well, and for those of you following along in the Dungeon Master's Guide, so this is the optional healer's kit dependency. A character can't spend any hit dice after finishing a short rest until someone expends a use of a healer's kit. And it basically simulates, like, a short rest isn't sitting down and having a cup of tea. A short rest is bandaging your open wounds and kind of stitching yourself back together. So I like the narrative that creates. I don't know. I'm in two minds about it, because what it does do is it increases accountancy, which I'm looking to increase a sense of danger and risk. I think there have been various options, including like meeting a moss man and using bits of his moss that are naturally occurring. So there's been room for a kind of a little bit of, well, what can we get hold of that we can use as healers kits? Now you are in the Tomb of the Nine Gods. I don't think this is a massive spoiler. There may be vague hints to things in Tomb of Annihilation. Would it be a shocker, listener, to know that in the level 1 to 12 massive campaign Tomb of Annihilation, there is a tomb that will try and annihilate you.
Whoa! I didn't.
Yeah.
That's not what I signed up for.
kind of. You all came to me and said, "This is what we want to play," and I went, "Well, if you're sure." Now that you're in that, one of the factors is, oh yeah, if we run out of torches, if we run out of food, now we can't forage. So yeah, it does introduce a ticking clock, I guess, of we've only got so many short rests to complete this in. Mm-hmm. You tell me, how have you found that rule? I'm open to feedback on it.
So great. I think that it's interesting. Like I said, it really kind of gives you an aspect of resource management. And I know that when you're, if you go through D&D Beyond, you can check on or off to use encumbrance rules, right? So there are different things that you need to think about, right? Oh, my character has 67 long swords that they've decided to pilfer along the way that they're carrying along with them. But well, how heavy is that? How are they managing to carry all of that with them? So it makes sense, and it makes sense. Hey, in a group like ours where we don't have a ton of magical healing, you have to have something like that, right? I keep anytime we come across dead people or we come across loot, I'm hoping not to find treasure. I'm hoping to find a healer's kit. Every time. That's like when our Moss Man joined us, I'm like, oh wait, but did he come with a healer's kit? Because welcome to the party, friend. And it is interesting. I specifically like the way that's kind of synergized for us because my character Tuza, right, has in her backstory she was an outlander, and so her mom was a gatherer while her dad was a fisherman, and so she spent a lot of time out in the woods figuring out what you can eat, what you can use maybe to bandage yourself if you get hurt in the woods. And so him bringing the nature aspect to that, I think has been really interesting to allow us to use, hey, you can have this moss to kind of clean and pack your wounds and use in place of gauze. As far as one thing that I constantly screw up is when we very infrequently go ahead and get a long rest that you can only get back half of your hit dice, because I have to remember that because my character sheet online is always going to try and give me everything back. That part is annoying for me just because that requires extra brain power that I have so little and I have to put it other places. But I think that it's been really interesting to play in a world like this, right? It brings that element of realism to a fantastical situation, and it certainly makes you stop and think about every single thing that you're doing. And for an overthinker, that's maybe not the best thing, but it does make me think, right? You do death rolls privately. That's something that I love to do. One of the very few times I ran a game, I said, okay, we're going to set them privately because I don't want you guys seeing, oh, they rolled a 19, they passed, so I don't have to pay attention to them right now, because that's not the way that's going to work, right? And so I said, set it to private. This person rolled it to me privately and then went, oh, thank God. And I went, what did you think the point of rolling it privately was? I didn't want people to know, right? I didn't want people to know what the roll outcome was, and now everybody knows what the roll outcome was. But it really does bring a different element to it. And then, rests, right? We have a different rule on resting. Some places aren't safe, full stop. The idea of being able to let down your guard enough to be able to rest is another one of those fantastical ideas in a situation like this, in a place called the Tomb of Annihilation. So let's talk about how you do resting in your games, or not.
Right, yeah, it's not called the Tomb Motel, easy lounger. So I'm using a combination of two rules together that have a really interesting impact. So one in the Dungeon Master's Guide is called Slow Natural Healing. characters don't regain hit points at the end of a long rest. Instead, a character can spend hit dice to heal at the end of a long rest, just as with a short rest. Although notice, like for that, you don't need to use a healer's kit. That is your body repairing itself. And then as a reminder, as we just talked about, the standard rule applies that you get half of your hit dice to spend on healing back each night. So you can still do a hefty amount of healing to yourself as long as you've got some hit dice. But if you get back half every night, that's still quite a lot of hit points back. But what it does mean, so loads of arguments online about the 5-fight adventuring day or whatever D&D is designed around, that there are supposed to be a number of small fights that wear you down and then one big fight and then you go to bed. But actually trying to structure that so it actually works and stopping people from just going, well, we had a big fight, now let's go back to bed and be completely healed, as if nothing had happened. It's just really hard to structure stories in that way. Like, if anybody else has figured out how, let me know. But even in written scenarios, there's lots of different ways of kind of breaking that. So I like the idea that you can't get all your hit points back. It's still like a world away. So in second edition, you got back 1 hit point per day. Yeah, 3 hit points if you spend the entire day in bed. And if you have an entire week off, you get to add your constitution bonus. So compare that to like standard 5th edition, where you go to bed and, you know, your 12th level fighter gets back 120 hit points and is literally as if none of the fights that happened the day before have any lasting consequence. They're gone.
Yeah.
And we're tying that with another rule, which is the only one which is not in the Dungeon Master's Guide.
That lingering wounds?
No, the safe resting. Lingering wounds is in, So this was in, the first time I saw it was, there was an adaptation of Lord of the Rings, I think done by Cubicle 7 for 5th edition rules. And because Lord of the Rings and that world is so based on big journeys, they just said, look, it's really simple. Unless you're in a sanctuary, which is really clearly defined as a safe space, you just can't take a long rest. And it's kind of the only way to make overland travel meaningful. Otherwise, like, if you have a big hex crawl, you roll on the random encounter table, oh, we've got 5 goblins. Well, they're not, like, there's nothing at stake there. You spend an hour playing out that combat, but there's no way 5th level player characters are going to lose against 5 goblins. But also, if you can then immediately go to bed, then why spend an hour playing out that combat? Because it has no consequence at all. If those goblins are chipping away on your hit points and spells because you don't know when you're next going to sleep, suddenly that changes things hugely.
Yeah.
How did you find it?
Well, so I'm very thankful that I do not have a spellcaster, which at first I'm like, oh, I don't have spells. I love, like, we know, if anybody has been listening to me at all, ever in real life or on this podcast, clerics are my life. I love clerics, but, right, spells reset on a long rest. Unless you're a warlock, I know there is that one person, Lee, out there who goes, oh, warlock, short rest. Okay, but for the most of them, it's going to rely on a long rest to refresh. And I don't think I would want to have to manage my spells with the oppressive thought of, oh God, when am I going to get these back? Like, I'm supposed to be healing people. I'm supposed to be supporting. I'm supposed to be this, that, the other thing. And if I don't get a long rest anytime soon, then I'm just going to be completely useless to the party. So I'm finding it interesting to watch. Initially our party was comprised of a cleric, the paladin, and then Tim was a sorcerer, right? He was a wild magic sorcerer. And then I am a blood hunter. So we had the sorcerer, which regain, I think there's sorcery points maybe on a short rest, but again, him having to manage his spell slots, paladin smites, but he's not really using them. But really, like, I commend Kenny for he's the right person. He's the right person to not stress out about whether or not he uses a spell to kill you. Because sometimes, honestly, I think Kenny's like, well, you know what? I don't like your character anyway, so fuck off. I'm not gonna I'm not gonna heal you.
It's a fair assessment.
You're just gonna die. I mean, and he was a death domain cleric anyway, so whatever. He's just sending more people to his god. He could justify it that way. But yeah, I would not want to have to have that kind of resource management already. I'm my oh gosh, I forget what they're called. The things that I do, the
maledicts, the blood things.
Yeah, blood maledicts, the blood things that I do that I look at all the time that I can't remember the words are. Yeah, those things that I do, like my fallen puppet. That one time that I made Mirko after he went down to 0 hit points, I was like, "No, get back up and keep fighting," and he rose up and he took another swing. Those things they refresh on short rests. Thank goodness. But yeah, a lot of the things, no. Now
I've got some defending myself on the adventuring day that I want to do. So yeah, if I was a caster in that situation, I would legit a long rest caster. I would legit find that incredibly stressful. Heading out into a jungle, not knowing where I was going to get a long rest. However, it was a bit of an illusion because I knew that every 5 to 6 days there was going to be a potential safe space, which means, and I go back to this mathematically, rightly or wrongly, 5th edition is based on 5 to 6 encounters a day. So what I did was I stretched our definition of a day. You would have 5 to 6 encounters, and then there would be the possibility of a long rest. And I know setting off into a jungle, you don't know that.
Lucky for you, I'll forget that by the time we play again. So,
but you're no longer on the jungle, so I'm allowed to kind of spoil that. True. But I think if DMs, if you're listening to this and going, yeah, I'm going to introduce safe resting so that people can't take a long rest by finding a seemingly quiet room in a populated dungeon or in the middle of a zombie and dinosaur-filled jungle, I would not sleep well in that environment. What you do have to do is you have to make sure that with fairly regular frequency, there are safe locations. And I think it does make, it made for interesting role play. So there were situations where you met the antagonistic force of the Flaming Fist and had to negotiate with them for somewhere safe to stay. There are other locations where you had to, when you defeated people, you could take over their lair and that could be safe. So in many ways, from my point of view, it kind of generated more interesting story. And actually, there wasn't a point where anybody completely ran out of spells or hit points until a character did. But that was a different thing.
Yeah, well, don't worry. We'll talk about that later.
But that was not...
And then I'll bring it up again.
Not because of safe resting. Okay, I'm now ready to move on.
Okay, all right. I mean, I agree with you 100%. I agree with you. And I didn't know that about, the day and the amount of combats and then stretching that out. But I think that that's a fair point, making sure that there are things available. And if you have, implemented a healer's kit dependency, you can't go, okay, well, I mean, we started in this town. We're not going to encounter another town again. So have fun. You bought like 2 healer's kits. Oh, that's all they had there. And now there's nothing. So when you run out and you just die. Like, if you want to set your players up for a miserable experience, fine. But like you said, we've met a moss man and we figured out that we can use the moss that he has on his body as part of that. If your players come across people who have been, downed in battle, maybe they've got a healer's kit on them too. They just have to be smart enough to look for it, right? So putting those pieces in there will help not stress your players out so much. On to another thing that is very stressful, like holes in your neck, which keeps happening, right? Lingering wounds. I believe the way it works is when a character drops to 0 hit points, they have to roll a d20 to determine whether or not they get a lingering wound. And if they do, they have to roll another table to determine what that wound is. Now, I've not looked at this table. I've not looked at, I don't want to have, I know that holes in the neck can happen because that's happened twice. And I'm pretty sure just mild scarring can happen. But like, what's the worst possible lingering wound you can have? Like, do you lose a
Well, then,
limb? And
yeah, they
and
get bad.
have you ever had a player become severely impacted by, say, like a loss of an archer loss of an arm, and now they can't draw back their bow, and so they have nothing left to do? Has first stop, rewind, Kristen. Do you implement these nasty rules in all of the games that you play, that you run? Are you this mean in all of the games that you run?
Okay, I'm gonna answer that and several other questions. So first of all, this is the lingering injuries rule in the Dungeon Master's Guide, and I've made 2 elements of homebrew. So in the Dungeon Master's Guide, it goes, you can do, if you're going to use these, you could do it every time somebody takes a critical hit. You could do it every time somebody drops to 0 hit points, every time somebody saves a death saving throw by 5 or more. And I just went, no, it's just falling to 0. Thanks. Let's not go crazy. And I think, although I meant to double check, I added in that you could have one more roll to kind of confirm it, essentially make a death save, a random roll, and to give a 50-50 chance. And the reason I did that is we play where I give out inspiration once per level.
Yep.
So there is quite a lot of the time people have inspiration kicking around, and it is possible in the middle of a fight to go, actually, I really cannot be bothered dealing with a lingering wound right now.
Yeah.
The only other change I made is there's, I think, only 2 or 3 lingering wound tables in the Dungeon Master's Guide, which gets a bit imprecise. So I went and found one that has, for every damage type, has a different kind of lingering wound.
Oh, okay.
So bludgeoning, acid. But it's the same level of impact on the character as the one in the Dungeon Master's Guide. And we'll come on to this, but of all the rules that I'm implementing, it's the one actually I have the most mixed feelings about. But since you ask, we're on bludgeoning. So number 1 would be you have a brain injury. You have disadvantage on intelligence, wisdom, charisma checks and saving throws. If you fail a saving throw against bludgeoning damage, force damage or psychic damage, you're also stunned until the end of your next turn. Or you could have a broken nose, which is painful but has no other adverse effect.
Well, I mean, beauty standard wise, it definitely has another adverse effect. It makes you unique. Anyway, continue. I'm not defending my nose or anything.
It's a strong Roman nose. That's what.
This is what I'm told often. Continue.
Yeah, so I introduced it in Curse of Strahd because in Curse of Strahd, again, I don't think this is spoilers, like there are people with prosthetic limbs, and if you're playing in anything like standard D&D rules, you have to go, well, how? How does a person lose a limb? Because that's not, like, we've all played characters who've to like level 12 who've been in fighting all their time, and every time they go to bed and they're absolutely fine. So there was a mismatch between the rules and the world. And also that particular, we've been whacked down to 0, get healed, and you get a fight. And sometimes they're great fights because they're really exciting, but we're like 3 people go to 0 in the course of the fight twice each. And sometimes it's exciting and sometimes it just gets a bit ridiculous. So yeah, I added in lingering wounds. Wasn't in the first few 5th edition campaigns I played. I just played absolutely standard rules. For Curse of Strahd, it felt really necessary for the story. And I think for Tomb of Annihilation, which has a load of optional rules in the beginning, like changing, you have to roll way higher on death saves, for example. Like there's a load of optional, even more deadly rules just for Tomb of Annihilation that I didn't use. But it just felt there's a kind of element of survival horror about heading off into the jungle and away from civilization that I thought Lingering Wounds speaks to.
Yeah.
In Curse of Strahd, where it's in the civilized environment, I had people with major kind of gut wounds that were really bad. That then had to make it led to role playing because they had to make some very difficult compromises with high level spellcasters to get fixed.
Sure.
The slight problem I do have with the tables is so many of them are really quite bad until you get major healing, like high level spells like heal. So I like the idea of the tables, but I'm just a bit worried that actually they're either cosmetic and therefore they don't matter, or you're pretty screwed until you get really high level healing, which for high level characters will just be nothing and irrelevant.
Right.
And for low level characters will be impossible.
So it sounds like it's devoid kind of that in between, like either you have this cute scar, it's all right, chicks dig scars, don't worry about it, or you have internal bleeding and you're probably going to die if you don't fix that immediately. There's no like, you kind of sprained your ankle and you're going to have, 10 feet, 5 feet less walking speed for the next week, because that's going to severely impact your movement. There's not a lot of that middle ground, it sounds like, in those tables.
I mean, it may just be how we've rolled. Like, I'm looking at the list now, and there are some that like halve your speed or
it could be the kind of damage
of
that
alcohol.
We're taking them to.
Yeah, that's also true. Like, I kind of like stories. It feels kind of in keeping with the genre, like somebody gets kind of mortally wounded. I'm thinking maybe perhaps a bit more Game of Thrones. Spoilers. But where people start losing bits and bobbins and then having to learn to work. It's not the end of the character, but it's kind of, if you, as we know in our world, if you fight for a living, people get wounded, and seriously so. But the story doesn't necessarily end. They then learn how to live with those changes that have been wrought upon their body.
Sure.
And I'm kind of interested in those stories where you do end up with somebody with, say, dwarven made prosthetic limbs who have to learn to fight with their other hand. So the aim for me always would be to get to the point where the disability no longer is a disability, but the journey to get there is an interesting story. I'm not quite sure these rules do that yet.
Well, then, in your experience in running games or being part of a game that maybe employs these kind of rules, have you come across a moment? I would assume that it would be memorable, but have you come across a moment when a party member has been impacted greatly by a lingering wound like this, where the party has had to kind of rally around them, redirect something to be able to overcome it? Has that happened for you yet?
Yeah, I think, like I say, in Curse of Strahd, the fact that one of them had this kind of horrific stomach wound and had was kind of leaking their stomach acid into their body, meant that they had to go and have a very difficult conversation with somebody they really didn't want to have a difficult conversation with, in a way that they could have entirely dodged out of, but the whole party going, no, we have to risk this. And that actually did lead to a lot of story. I guess in Tomb of Annihilation, Magic of Time, aka Tim, and his whistling throat eventually being cured by this kind of divine creature that you had to quest for several days to meet. That kind of felt like the right moment. Like, that felt earned, I guess, to take that away. But if not, that kind of, what was it? One level of exhaustion, so disadvantage on all ability checks permanently, as you whistle through a hole in your throat. Oh, geez, that's,
Listen, I put a scarf in there. We plugged it up to try and stop the whistle.
I mean, it's a solution. This podcast does not provide medical advice. Please seek a medical professional.
We didn't have moss then. Moss would have been the first choice.
If you accidentally have a tracheotomy in real life, do not stick a random scarf in it, I think is what we're saying. Are we agreed on that?
Probably.
Okay.
Probably. Maybe. I don't know. Not medical advice from this group.
Just role-playing advice. So it has generated some story or some kind of moments that have been interesting. And then there've been a couple of other moments where I've kind of rolled on the table and gone, oh, actually at this point in the campaign, this is just going to get really annoying. Stroke possibly nudge a character towards being unplayable, which isn't what I want.
Yeah. Probably not at this point either. Well, all right. So when I was reading up on these things, and I did so as vaguely as I could, because I don't want to ruin things for me personally as we go along. But for anybody looking, it's in the Dungeon Master's Guide in Chapter 9. It's called Dungeon Master's Workshop. You can find many of these things. I also found rules for sanity mechanics, which I already knew existed. I've had a player go through that before, but also hero and honor mechanics. If you want to read more on it, you can go, what is it, page 263, because I have it open. But obviously you've chosen what works for you and your games and how to integrate them. But what was your decision-making process like when you determined which rule sets to include, which to disclude when starting a game? So, for example, when, I think about sanity mechanics and I think about you playing Call of Cthulhu, there are definitely big sanity mechanics there. But you have not chosen to implement them in a setting where, Tomb of Annihilation, we're in a jungle with zombies and dinosaurs and undead dinosaurs and all sorts of horrific kind of things. It definitely could cause somebody to start to lose some of their sanity with more and more exposure to these gory things. So what was your decision-making process when you decided which pieces of these optional rules to include or not? I know you said that there's, I think you're trying to just make me understand that you're not as mean as I make you sound like you are. Oh, there are these optional rules to really kill you hard and fast in the beginning of the Tomb of Annihilation.
Specifically, I'm not as cruel as I could be.
Right.
That's what I'm saying. There's the opportunity to be crueler.
Of course.
I've just let sit
so please
there.
Don't. But
okay.
How did you figure out which ones to include and not?
I think it is campaign by campaign versus like running D&D 5th edition. I will always run it this way. But I did, like, when I properly dug into the Dungeon Master's Guide, like the Dungeon Master's Guide gets a lot of stick as being largely unnecessary unless you want the magic items. Like, who doesn't want the magic items? And while it is sort of chaotically structured, because they were really up against the deadline, I think the number of optional rules and the ability to customize the game is really great. And I would love to play like with the hero and the reputation and the sanity rules at some point. I hope very much they keep that when they do the revised edition in this year. I hope the new Dungeon Master's Guide really keeps that. I was sitting down and trying to figure out the feel. I think it's possible to play Tomb of Annihilation could be played in different ways. Curse of Strahd, as soon as I read it, I went, well, this is Gothic horror, and that's my yardstick. I'm not interested in kind of hammy Frankenstein's monster versions. I want to keep this as grounded as possible, and so I chose those rules in accordance. I think you could do a more Indiana Jones pulpy Tomb of Annihilation where you're just kind of swinging from things all the time. But I kind of felt like such a big chunk of it is a massive trek through the jungle. And so kind of attrition and rations and not getting dysentery felt like they were all really important things. So that definitely meant like the short, slow natural healing and safe resting felt essential to make that hex crawl, which is, like a good third, if not more, of the story.
Yeah.
Felt really necessary. And I think similarly with Lingering Wounds, it was just to make sure there was a way that, while not necessarily more deadly, that any fight there was just enough going. Is this a fight we want to be having, or a fight we should sneak away from, or parlay? Because if we do get dropped to zero, we might find that we are then limping or missing an arm for the rest of the campaign.
Right.
So yeah, it was about what will raise the stakes without making it. There are, and again, like there are other in the Dungeon Master's Guide. There's other rules where, for example, it reframes it and goes, "Well, a long rest is a week off." And again, I looked at that and went, "Well, that's going to be too extreme for us because once you're in the jungle,
right, I don't
you
even
do
know
need
how
to
you
keep
do
moving
that.
forward." Yeah. Well, I think it makes sense if you've got you're largely in the city and then you pop into a dungeon for a bit and then you come out again for a week.
Right.
But the way Tomb of Annihilation is written, there is no downtime.
Nope.
Whereas if you were playing an episodic story with downtime, that would make complete sense.
I agree. Just thinking of, the very few safe spaces that we had to long rest in our journey so far. I don't even know that we could have spent a week there and still been safe. I
Well, I
don't
mean,
think that
you
that's
could have spent a week, but I mean, apart from Matusa getting really, really good at finding fruit and nuts, but like for lots of parties who don't have an outlander with them, oh well, maybe we could hold up for a week, but we might starve
Yep.
because
Yeah, that's
we
fair.
don't have enough food for this to go on forever.
Um, it's it's been it's been a journey. It's been a real eye-opening experience. And Tom, as much as I tease you and give you garbage about being merciless and cruel and you hate us and you just want to see us die, the difference in my character's choices and actions in a game like the one that you've laid out for us is incredible. For example, Atuza chose to take the healer's feat to help the party regain hit points instead of something that would make her a better fighter. In a different scenario, why the heck would she take the healer's feat, right? I mean, so she's a blood hunter. She does hurt herself in order to empower her attacks. So it's not the craziest thing story wise for her to have done. But in a game where the mechanics are you can go spend an hour with your feet up, chit chatting with your friends and roll your hit dice, you're fine. It's not that big of a deal. There's much more gravity to every single decision that we make in this game. Surviving the perils of the jungle is not something that I take for granted. So, like rolling death saves in private, giving you that different intensity to an already dire situation, making your characters stop and think, should I continue to fight, or do I really kind of need to take a turn out of combat to help my fallen comrade? Um, and while part of me may never forgive you for killing my favorite tabaxi, Magic of Time, aka Tim, a different part of me really does thank you for introducing me to this different aspect of the game that I really do love so much. Honestly, I feel like it has a real potential to forge some amazing personal bonds because the stakes feel so much higher. It feels that much more realistic. Like you're choosing to save Lee personally instead of Tim. You know what I mean? And the group that we started with was already close knit, but I do think that rules like that make it so much heavier do give you the opportunities to have a really, really nicely formed, bonded party. Or in instances where you choose not to heal somebody, right? And they just make it out because they passed a death save with a natural 20. There might be some harbored resentment there. But I think that it's been a fantastic experience. Anybody listening, if you have somebody who wants to try these optional rules again, Dungeon Master's Guide, Chapter 9 in the Dungeon Master's Workshop. I'm sure that we could get Tom on board with telling you all the ins and outs of how to be really, really mean and painful to the players. He does like it so much. I don't want to take that away from you. I do know that, if we don't get hurt during a session, you feel like you haven't done your job. And I appreciate
It's
the
just
job that you do.
I'm aiming to create mild peril. That's
Just mild. It
all.
feels a
Just a
little
sense. Just
like
some,
not a
a little bit of
schmedium.
stakes. Maybe medium peril. Medium
Okay.
peril to
Well,
abject terror. Anywhere
you
on that scale.
do a phenomenal job at it. Constantly trying to, again, overthink what I'm doing, if I'm doing the right thing, not only by me, but by the party, has really, really brought just a different element to the game. So I appreciate it and you, and don't take that and mean that you need to go any heavier with it because it might be a
No, it's
okay.
fine. It was all we covered it in session, and that's the final thing to say. Like, if you're going to use optional rules, discuss it in session 0 and make a clear document that people can, because nobody wants to be surprised when lingering rules are suddenly introduced halfway through.
That's
That would be
very
bad.
fair. Yep. Tom did this wonderful thing where at the beginning, while we were even talking about, character creation, he said, okay, this is the way this is going to work. These are spells that are banned. These are the way that the healing sessions are going to look like. This is what you have a potential of lingering wounds. Your resting is not going to be something you can take for granted. And laying that all out for your players in the beginning sets the tone, right? And make sure everybody's on the same page so you don't have those, well, I mean, I thought that I could. Well, you can't. Sorry. So thank you once again for joining me. To all of you listening, thank you so much for joining us. We hope that you not only enjoyed it, but maybe that you learned a thing or two as well along the way. From all of us here, stay cool. But if you can't be cool, Tom, what should you be?
Wicked.
Wicked. Until next time, thank you.
Bye all.
Thank you to Kev G. Moore for providing the music for this series. Check out his links for YouTube, Spotify and Patreon in the links below. Wherever you found us today, don't forget to like and subscribe for more great content, and if you want to find out more about what we do, how to support us, pick up some merch and find links to our friends like JB Media, visit us at wickedcoolkids.co.uk.
I did enjoy that moment. I was very happy making.
I don't. You stress me out a lot. Okay, ready?
It's written in the book.
To be an asshole? Great. We're going to talk all about it. We're going to talk about you being an asshole in 5.